is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Six of Crows by Lee Bardugo, brought to you by Jesse Pulverkus. In these chapters, we get a little bit more of Inej and Kaz, and we meet someone new, Nina, who has a real complicated history with this guy that she's intent on saving, apparently. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome, everybody, to the show. My name is Natasha. Again, many thanks to Jesse for commissioning this episode. This trio of chapters, it's been nice because this book does chapters. So it was chapters 4, 5, and 6 for this Inej, Kaz, and Nina. And I really enjoyed, because this, world building in this book has been above average already. But I keep being impressed by how real it feels, how well fleshed out and convincing it all is. And this section, we get into something that I feel like it could easily have gone over the top, having, a prisoner fight club that involves wild animals. But it's sort of mitigated, I think, by the circumstances with which it's explained. And just there's some stuff that I'll talk about when we get there, I guess. I'm getting ahead of myself here. But I just wanted to say that right out, because this is the kind of thing that if you told me, oh, there's a prisoner fight club, I'd be like, oh, right. Yeah, maybe. But I feel like it's handled well. So, all right, let's begin with chapter 4, Inej. She has gone to this bar to deal with firing somebody that Kaz sent her to talk to. Rigeur, I believe is how you say his name. And he is really not pleased to be being let go, and he doesn't have anybody to direct his fury at. So he comes at Inej, which apparently is something that happens often because she is a woman and they think that she's going to be an easy target. And because they think, I believe, and this isn't exactly flat out said, but I think it's really implied that they are given a lot of this bad news in the Crow Club, which has a no fight rule. And I think that a lot of these dudes believe that she's going to want to respect the rules to the point that she will allow a beatdown on herself. And they are sorely mistaken. So I like this part because he comes at her, and she puts brass knuckles on and cracks him across the face. And he's like, hey, I didn't hurt you. I was just talking shit. And she realizes at this point that everybody's watching. So she hits him again, because that's what you do. You let everybody know once you've got their attention that there is no fucking with you. So the fact that Inej does this, even though this is not her favorite thing, she doesn't take pleasure in beating the shit out of people. She doesn't enjoy hurting people, but she understands the expedience and necessary evil of doing this in order to lay down some ground rules and get a reputation for somebody who people need to take seriously. So I really liked this whole thing, and there's I'm trying to find the exact moment, When Kaz had brought her to the slat, he'd warned her that he wouldn't be able to watch out for her, that she'd have to fend for herself, and she had. It would have been easy enough to turn away when they called her names or sidled up to ask for a cuddle, but do that and soon it was a hand up your blouse or a try at you against a wall. So she'd let no insult or innuendo slide. She'd always struck first and struck hard. Sometimes she even cut them up a bit. It was fatiguing, but nothing was sacred to the Kirch except trade, so she'd gone out of her way to make the risk much higher than the reward when it came to disrespecting her. And then this moment, it says that he looks surprised and a bit betrayed. I thought we was friendly, he protested. The sad part was that they were. Inej liked Rozhak, but right now he was just a frightened man looking to feel bigger than someone. You know, is that the truest word or what? I really like that line a lot, and that's male fragility, guys. The egos, when they get damaged, just lash out in order to regain themselves, you know, and it's really dangerous and terrible. And then it gets frustrating because then guys will pull this kind of thing where they're like, well, I fought. And it's like, yeah, were you thinking that when you were about to stand up in my face and like threaten me? Was that what you were thinking, that we were friendly? So she takes off. And she is, I think she's heading specifically, to see, oh, that's right. This is because I lose track of exactly where she's headed here because sometimes she tells people a different thing than where she's actually going. And she winds up, listening in on Kaz and Per Haskell by ducking into this closet that has a bucket over a grate that's full of cleaning supplies. And the bucket she put it there because she knew that absolutely nobody would touch it. So there would always be this spot available for her to go and listen in. The grate is directly over the office, so she can hear every word. And it seems like Kaz might know that. Because there is a point where he mentions how this is like a leaky place that he knows as soon as he tells Per Haskell something that people are going to know. And Per Haskell seems to be like to take offense to that. Like Kaz is insinuating that he's the one running around telling people. And Kaz can't say, no, I know you're not telling it. It just gets out. Like there's no real way to get that across without insulting the guy in another way, basically, and being like, yeah, you have really shitty security, by the way. But he says this to Per Haskell while like staring directly at the grate. So that feels like something. And apparently Bollinger was like Per Haskell's dude. And so it's kind of an insult to him that Kaz went and did what he did and killed Bollinger the way that he did. With apparently not having told a soul about it. Like the only person that knew that was going to happen was Kaz himself and the guy who shot Bollinger. So that's understandable. If that was my guy, I would be upset also. So finally, Kaz tells him about this job that he has to go. And that it's going to be big money, but it's also an enormous risk. However, this dude is going to get his 20%, which is quite a pull. 20% of Kaz's jobs. That's a lot, man. I didn't expect it to be that high. You don't make any major moves without my say-so. Understood? Kaz must have nodded because Per Haskell leaned back in his chair and took a sip of lager. Are we to be very rich? Rich as saints in crowns of gold. The old man snorted. Long as I don't have to live like one. So this is a nice little moment of ego from Inej, because I don't feel like we've seen that from her that much. We did see a moment of her taking offense to Kaz, like talking shit about the gods, but that wasn't from her perspective. That was Kaz's perspective, and we see her just being like disapproving with him. But when we're in her POV the first time, she is intent on a job, and her ego isn't really factoring into it at that moment. It's more her being irritated at Kaz because he's pushing the envelope so hard that she almost doesn't get to the guards in time. So this part, just where was Kaz going? He hadn't mentioned any big job to her. And why Pym? The thought shamed her a bit. She could almost hear her father's voice. So eager to be queen of the thieves, Inej? It was one thing to do her job and do it well. It was quite another to want to succeed at it. She didn't want a permanent place with the dregs. She wanted to pay off her debts and be free of Ketterdam forever. So why should she care if Kaz chose Pym to run the gang in his absence? Because I'm smarter than Pym. Because Kaz trusts me more. But maybe he didn't trust the crew to follow a girl like her, only 2 years out of the brothels, not even 17 years old. She wore her sleeves long, and the sheath of her knife mostly hid the scar on the inside of her left forearm where the menagerie tattoo had once been, but they all knew it was there. I liked that because, you know, it's easy to see somebody who's as talented as Inej and whom everybody obviously respects to a degree. And they're all a little bit thrown whenever she's around them because of how quiet she can be and how, like, stealthily she moves. So it's easy to give her this sort of confidence, like almost a supernatural confidence in your head that goes with those kinds of almost supernatural abilities. But it turns out that's not necessarily the case. She maybe doesn't have that kind of confidence, or maybe she's just being really practical about it. And she knows that, yeah, maybe I am really good at my job, which she says I'm smarter than Pym. But, you know, has some self-awareness about, like, the situation that she's in. But I also did like the question of whether or not she wants to be queen of the thieves. And this is something that I was talking about. I don't remember if I talked about it on a podcast specifically or if I talked about it off mic with Rashawn, but we discussed what it's like when you are somebody who takes pride in doing well, whether or not the work that you do is important. And I use important with quotes around it. If you're somebody even who has that sort of personality, even if you're working at a shitty job, like, you know, a few years, at this point, like 4 years ago, I worked at this sandwich shop in Connecticut, and it was, you know, just a nothing like food customer service type job. But I really cared about doing well. I wanted them to know that I was really competent, that I was fast and efficient. And it was, I didn't want to, like, move up in the ranks there. I didn't want to become management. That wasn't my goal. But I wanted them to know that I could if I wanted. I wanted them to want me to become management and for me to have the option of being like, no, I'm going to go do something way better than that. And I feel like that's how Inej is. She has her own kind of pride, and it's less about everyone else knowing that, like, who she is, and more about doing the best that she can so that she has as many options open to her as possible. And I respect that a lot, you know? So then she and Kaz meet up. Like, she meets him outside. I have to imagine that he knows that she was listening, right? Like, we never really get any reference to that moment from his point of view. Because the next chapter is from his. There's never a moment where he's thinking to himself, I knew that Inej was listening that whole time, but I figure he had to, because she always knows what's going on, you know? Rachel says, I feel like he knows too much of everything to not know. Right. I feel like he's always got the sense of people. So he knows whether, even if he doesn't know necessarily the mechanics behind how she could have been listening. I assume he does know that, though, because of looking at the grate. But even if he didn't, he has to know that Inej is somebody who is going to investigate everything that she can. If she sees him heading in somewhere, if she's somebody who's always really good at being stealthy, why would she not utilize that in order to arm herself with some more information? But anyway, they go into his office, and there's some discussion of the fact that Kaz actually keeps his books for the sake of the old man, and so that he had something to point to when he called someone out for cheating or when he was looking for new investors. That was one of the big changes Kaz had brought to the gang. He'd given ordinary shopkeepers and legitimate businessmen the chance to buy shares in the Crow Club. At first they'd been skeptical, sure it was some kind of swindle, but he'd brought them in with tiny stakes and managed to gather enough capital to purchase the dilapidated old building, spruce it up, and get it running. It paid back big for those early investors. Or so the story went. Inej could never be sure which stories about Kaz were true and which were rumors he'd planted to serve his own ends. For all she knew, he'd conned some poor, honest trader out of his life savings to make the Crow Club thrive. I like that too. I like this adding to his mystique by being like, it seems like he's a brilliant businessman, but also that could be garbage too. But having the reputation for being a brilliant businessman is not something that you're going to be sorry for. So planting that kind of information around is a super smart idea. And it kind of gives Kaz a vibe of like Stringer Bell, if you guys watch The Wire. Somebody who comes into this like crime family. It's not really the word I want, but it's apt, I guess. And knows that there needs to be some sort of respectability to it, at least on the surface. Everybody knows what's really going on and everybody's aware that this isn't legit, but parts of it are, and people are too greedy to not try and get in on that. So I really like that aspect of it too, because I feel like it just shows how much Kaz understands how people's minds work. So I've got a job for you, Kaz said. What would you say to 4 million Kruger? Money like that is more curse than gift. My little Sully idealist. All you need is a full belly and an open road and an easy heart, Kaz. That was the difficult part. So at this point, she's thinking that not only is he, like, he's offering her this enormous job, but that it has to be such a risk that it's almost not worth it. When he says that it's a huge risk, he also adds, but should we scrape it? And she stops and says, should we scrape it? And his response is, we'll be kings and queens, Inej. And she's just like, maybe. She is just not somebody to be impressed with this kind of money. Like, is, again, she very practical and knows that that kind of money would be very useful to her? Obviously. But he's sort of treating this conversation as if they're just buddies talking about this wild escapade that they might go out on, and she's not fooled by that for a second. She knows that he's a manipulator. That's what he does. So she isn't off her guard for a second. Also, during this conversation, I really enjoy the fact that he just strips down to his pants. Like, he's got no shirt on for sure. I don't remember if he has regular pants on but in any case, he's bathing in front of her and she's really uncomfortable, which he has to know that she's uncomfortable. So I feel like that's a total power move. And it also gives us a glimpse of the fact that he has, that his hands are not, claws or made of molten coal or something. There was a shiny rope of scar tissue from some long ago street fight on his hands, and that's about it. So, speaking of which, round up Jesper and Muzzin. I want them here by dawn, and I'll need Wylan waiting at the Crow Club tomorrow night. Wylan? If this is for a big job, just do it. Inej crossed her arms. 1 minute he made her blush, and the next he made her want to commit murder. Are you going to explain any of this? When we all meet. This isn't an assignment, Inej. It's a job for you to take or leave as you see fit. An alarm bell rang inside her. She endangered herself every day on the streets of the Barrel. She'd murdered for the dregs, stolen, brought down bad men and good, and Kaz had never hinted that any of the assignments were less than a command to be obeyed. This was the price she'd agreed to when Per Haskell had purchased her contract and liberated her from the menagerie. So what was different about this job? Kaz finished with his buttons, pulled on a charcoal waistcoat, and tossed her something. It flashed in the air, and she caught it with one hand. When she opened her fist, she saw a massive ruby tie pin circled by gold laurel leaves. Fence it, Kaz said. Whose is it? Ours now. Whose was it? Kaz stayed quiet. He picked up his coat, using a brush to clean the dried mud from it. Someone who should have thought better before he had me jumped. Jumped? You heard me. Someone got the drop on you? He looked at her and nodded once. Unease snaked through her and twisted into an anxious, rustling coil. No one got the better of Kaz. He was the toughest, scariest thing walking the alleys of the barrel. She relied on it, and so did he. It won't happen again, he promised. I really enjoy that moment. Like, nobody is scarier than the person who can fuck with the scary guy, right? And he won't even tell her who it was. So she doesn't, I think, yeah, there's no point at which she mentions who the sigil is, because that's what the tie pin is. It's the sigil of the house. And the guy's name is Van Eck, but and they robbed the place together. Like, he talks about the painting that they stole. But she doesn't realize that this is from the same house. So yeah, I guess that's something interesting also, that while Inej may be somebody who's practical and really good at what she doesn't have that kind of knowledge just stored ready to go in her head the way that Kaz does. Which makes sense, because she's like given assignments and she goes and does them, but she's not worried about the face of things. She's not worried about learning how to like network and negotiate with people. Kaz is trying to run an alleged legitimate business, and so he needs to know this stuff. And I love how this chapter ends. And put an order in for a new hat, please. Kaz heaved a sigh as he braced himself for 3 painful flights of stairs. He looked over his shoulder and said, "Please, my darling Inej, treasure of my heart, won't you do me the honor of acquiring me a new hat?" The two of them. It's pretty good. So then we have Kaz, and he goes to a brothel. And on the way there, there's a lot of description about everything in the barrel. All of the, there's other brothels, there's other casinos, and big staged conversations about people getting one over on the casino and how much they won tonight. And it's all meant to lure people in, which I really enjoy, the descriptions of just the city life. Things like this really do it for me in terms of world building. I find it very amusing and interesting. And if it's done well, it adds a lot to the feeling that this universe is populated by more people than just the characters that we're seeing. So he's heading over there, and there's this moment as Kaz passed the emerald, and the emerald is capitalized, so it's the name of I think it's a brothel. He looked up at the false gold coins, letting the anger come at him. He needed it tonight as a reminder of what he'd lost, of what he stood to gain. He needed it to prepare him for this reckless endeavor. Brick by brick, he muttered to himself. They were the only words that kept his rage in check, that prevented him from striding through the emerald's garish golden green doors, demanding a private audience with Rollins, and slitting his throat. Brick by brick. It was the promise that let him sleep at night, that drove him every day, that kept Geordie's ghost at bay, because a quick death was too good for Pekka Rollins. Oh, shit. Who's Pekka Rollins? Yeah, I want to know all about this. I want to know what Pekka Rollins has to do with Geordie. I assume that's, this Pekka, is Pekka a man or a woman? I just, what did Pekka do to get Geordie killed? Because it feels like whatever it was, it has to be, So, despite the lies he'd spread and the claims he'd made to Giles tonight, Kaz wasn't a bastard. He wasn't even from Ketterdam. He'd been 9 and Geordie 13 when they'd first arrived in the city, a check from the sale of their father's farm sewn safely in the inner pocket of Geordie's old coat. Kaz could see himself as he was then, walking the stave with dazzled eyes, hand tucked into Geordie's so he wouldn't be swept away by the crowd. He hated the boys they'd been, 2 stupid pigeons waiting to be plucked. But those boys were long gone, and only Pekka Rollins was left to punish. One day Rollins would come to Kaz on his knees, so it's a man, okay, begging for help. If Kaz managed this job for Van Eck, that day would come much sooner than he could ever have hoped. Brick by brick, I will destroy you. So he goes into I'm trying to find the exact name of this brothel here. There's a description too. I forgot about this part. The sort of a Westworldy thing where you like leave who you are behind. There's a lot of people that come to West Stave dressed in costumes. It's like a very common thing to be wearing masks or cloaks with these huge hoods so that people can't really see your face, or wearing veils and partaking in all of the legal or not so legal debauchery that there is on offer here without being able to be identified when you go back home. At least hoping that you won't be identified. I'm sure that those disguises aren't necessarily as effective as these people hope they are, but it's better than just showing your face, right? And some of them wear these masks that are Suli fortune teller masks, and he is thinking about the fact that Inej had been really upset by the fact that they're wearing them as costumes because they're sacred symbols. And they're supposed to be worn by holy men and women who are actual fortune tellers that are like, this is ceremonial garb that people are treating like a joke. And it really bothers her. But yeah. It's just an interesting little thing to keep seeing. Piety doesn't seem really adequate because whenever I hear the word piety, I sort of feel like it's there's a hollowness implied, that somebody does a good show of seeming religious, but that they don't really follow the tenets of whatever they're supposedly believing in. I don't know the tenets of whatever religion it is that Inej is following, or if she does follow them, I don't, but there's something about the genuine distaste for how people treat things with like contempt or cavalierness that makes me feel like in her bones, she really believes it, whatever this is. So yeah, there's just a spirituality to her that I find simultaneously interesting and a little frustrating as well, because nobody likes a wet blanket, right? So every time that she brings it up, it's sort of like to reprimand him or other people, and that can get old. So I guess what I'm saying is lighten up, Inej. Nobody wants to hear it. So he passed the Blue Iris, the Bandy Cat, bearded men glowering from the windows of the forge, the Obscura, the Willow Switch, the dewy-eyed blondes at the House of Snow, and of course the Menagerie, also known as the House of Exotics, where Inej had been forced to don fake Suli silks. He spotted Tanta Helene in her peacock feathers and famous diamond choker holding court in the gilded parlor. She ran the menagerie, procured the girls, made sure they behaved. When she saw Kaz, her lips thinned to a sour line, and she lifted her glass, the gesture more threat than toast. He ignored her and pressed on. The House of the White Rose was one of the more luxurious establishments on West Stave. It had its own dock, and its gleaming white stone facade looked less like a pleasure house than a merchant mansion. Its window boxes were always bursting with climbing white roses, and their scent clung dense and sweet over this portion of the canal. I love this part, by the way. The parlor was even stickier with perfume. Huge alabaster vases overflowed with more white roses, and men and women, some masked or veiled, some with bare faces, waited on ivory couches, sipping near colorless wine and nibbling little vanilla cakes soaked in almond liqueur. And later on, he's talking about the Uncle Felix, the bawd who ran the White Rose, liked to say that his house girls were as sweet as his blossoms, but the joke was on the clients. That particular breed of White Rose, the only one hardy enough to survive the wet weather of Ketterdam, had no natural scent. All the flowers were perfumed by hand. I really like that detail a lot. Like, nothing about this is real at all. If you can deal with that, then fine. You'll have a good time probably still. But don't ever believe that, like, all of these women really like you, and don't believe that even these roses are fucking real. Like, it's just a lovely little detail that I found gratifying. So there are a lot of like peepholes built into this place, and they're a feature of all the brothels. They were a way to keep employees safe and honest, and they offered a thrill to anyone who enjoyed watching others take their pleasure. And Kaz goes and watches, but it's not people having sex. It's a woman with her hand pressed to this guy's forehead and the back of his neck. And she is doing this in silence. And then, like, finally stops and, like, tells him that she wishes him peace. And the guy leaves with, like, tears in his eyes. And we find out that Nina is somebody who can manipulate people's emotions. She is one of the Grisha. And I think that I had said in the first episode that it didn't seem like affecting emotion was something that the Grisha could really do. When they talked about being able to manipulate bodies, it seemed like physical things. But apparently, you know, it didn't really occur to me at the time. But affecting emotions, like, she discusses it with him a little bit and says that she's releasing certain chemicals in their brains. So it is a physical thing that she's doing. Even though it winds up affecting their emotions, it's a very, like, it's a scientific, she's basically, you know, giving them an antidepressant, a pill that just bumps their dopamine for, you know, whatever length of time. So I found this really interesting, and also it kind of like alarmed me, because if she's able to do this with just her normal power and ability, if she took that drug, what could she do then? How would this, that feels so potentially like terrifying. But yeah, she says that the guy who had come to see her, his wife died a month ago and his business has been a wreck since. So she is, you know, trying to help him out a little bit. But it's not really going to necessarily like right all of the wrongs for him. She feels like I can make him feel better, but there is a shortcut that he's taking around the grief here that isn't really going to work for him in the end. He can do what he needs to do to like feel better, but it's not going to erase what happened. And eventually he's going to have to deal with the loss in a direct way. And that's something I like the way that was handled, because it's, you know, it's a very fine line when you're talking about grief, to address what that's really like for somebody and acknowledge how difficult that is, while also emphasizing that you can't really skip it. And that if you try, you can take antidepressants and do things to make yourself feel better for a time. And that's valid, and you should. And sometimes people, like, that's the only way that they make it through. But that there's a line between helping yourself get through something and doing something to avoid experiencing it at all. And there's no not experiencing something that you're going through. Like, you just can't do that. As much as we would all love to skip the long, unhappy process of dealing with grief, I can't emphasize enough how exhausting grief is. And I have experienced fairly little of it in my life compared to many people. And it is still this draining, just exhaust. That's the only word. it is something that takes all of the energy out of you, that comes up on you. It sneaks up on you in these really mean, like, unfortunate ways at moments that you're not expecting it. And I think that's because you're not expecting it. When you go to someone's house who passed away, you have braced yourself mentally to go deal with that, to be in their home, and you know that this is probably going to be hard, and you're like steeled mentally for whatever you're going to come across. And so sometimes we'll walk out of that kind of situation and be like, actually, that wasn't so bad. And it's because we prepped. But then there are times where you're washing the dishes and watching a TV show and you hear a line that is something that they said, and all of a sudden it's just like they're standing right next to you again for a moment, and you feel the loss all over again, like it just happened. And it's totally unexpected. And it's not the kind of thing that you thought would affect you at all. Like that line, why would that get to you? But it's your guard's down, you know, and you're just doing some everyday thing and reminded of somebody in an everyday way. And it reminds you how you will miss them every day. And those are the moments that they don't tell you about. Nobody warns you about that. They warn you about how holidays are going to be hard, and, you know, when their birthday rolls around or the anniversary of their death, but they don't tell you about washing the dishes or when a song comes on your way to work and you have to pull over and cry. They don't tell you about that. So this whole scene with her and like discussing how she can help him out, but like there's only so much that she can do and he's going to have to cope at some point. I think that that's a tiny peek at this wider world that she deals with. And I should emphasize here too, that what she does, she's like indentured. So she is not here by choice, but she's protected because of where she is. So if there's like a mention of her walking, if she were to leave this pleasure house, she would be at risk to get like snatched up by somebody and be sold off again. And while being indentured here is not ideal, it's a better situation than she would find at a lot of places. It's somewhat luxurious, you know, and she's able to a degree, I feel like she has some control over the situation because she's valuable. And so I also like that this is somebody with this great ability who's living in this really bizarre situation and who is going to constantly be at risk of something worse if she tries to get out of this, which is pretty rough. So Kaz asks her, could you compel him to do something, maybe make him forget his wife? And she says, alter the pathways in his mind? Don't be absurd. The brain is just another organ, Kaz said, quoting Van Eyck. Yes, but it's an incredibly complex one. Controlling or altering another person's thoughts, well, it's not like lowering a pulse rate or releasing a chemical to improve someone's mood. There are too many variables. No Grisha is capable of it. So yeah, she doesn't know that there's a drug out there that might make her capable of it. Will you send him on his way then? Advise him to find a new wife and stop darkening your door? She ran a brush through her light brown hair and glanced at him in the mirror. Does Per Haskell have plans to forgive my debt? None at all. Well, then Van Asker must be allowed to grieve in his own way. I have another client scheduled in half an hour, Kaz. What business? He asks her if she knows about this drug, and she says that it's rumors. Like, as far as she knows, all of these stories are just made up. It doesn't mean anything to her. And when he tries to tell her that it's real, she has the same reaction that Kaz had, which is, you know, he throws her this chunk of gold and she's just like, yeah, this is just gold. What do you want me to believe your fucking fairy story because you have gold? This is not anything. And he explains everything. And her reaction is that the guy who created this drug needs to be killed, which is, you know what, didn't really like occur to me that somebody was going to feel that way, but that makes total sense. And yeah, he's like, that's not what the job is. And she's like, yeah, I don't give a shit. It's not about the money. He's like fucking shit up with this. This can't be allowed to happen. She tells him letting him live would be the most outrageous kind of irresponsibility. My answer is no. He isn't hiding out. The Shurjans have him at the ice court. Nina paused. Then he's as good as dead. The Merchant Council doesn't think so. They wouldn't be going to this trouble or offering up this kind of reward if they thought he'd been neutralized. Van Eck was worried. I could see it. If not, I'll take the hit. But if Beaubayeur is alive, someone is going to try and break him out of the ice court, and why shouldn't it be us? And this is when she starts to realize that he's going to need somebody else to help him. And that person is somebody that she has asked him to help before. Somebody named Matthias. And he refused to do it. And this was an interesting little thing because, like, you know, his whole response is basically like, yeah, I could have helped him and it would have cost me so much more than it was worth. I would have had to call in all these favors. I would have had to pay a ton to bribe the guards. I would have just, like, it would have cost me. And what was I going to get out of it? You're being grateful to me? Fucking whatever. Like, I don't care about your gratefulness. It was not practical for me. Therefore, I did not do it. And he's not mincing words at all here, which I think in some ways, the fact that Kaz is such a bastard makes him a little bit more straightforward to deal with, in that, you know, when he says shit like this, that he's probably being honest with you. And you know that there's always going to be some other underhanded thing going on. But to a point, he's a very simple man. He'll do something if there's something in it for him. The end. That's very, you know what? That's the kind of person that you can understand. Sometimes the only part you don't know is what is in it for him. He agrees to do something for you and you're not sure why, and you're glad he's helping, but it makes you nervous because obviously there's something that he can get that you don't know of. And that is always an uncomfortable feeling, to be like, yeah, I'm grateful for your help and everything, but why are you being cool about this? So she says, even if you could get to him, Matthias would never agree to help you. It's just a question of leverage, Nina. You don't know him. Don't I? He's a person like any other, driven by greed and pride and pain. That is a good fucking line, everybody. Driven by greed and pride and pain. Greed gets construed as being somebody who wants money, but that's not necessarily what everybody's greedy for. Pride, everybody's got some of that on some level. And pain, you betcha. Lots. Everybody. Even people who've had pretty good lives. You know, they see things in proportion to their own life. So what might be a great life in comparison to someone else's, they haven't lived someone else's life. They've lived their own life. So for them, that that pain is enormous. And I just felt like that was a real, like, Westworldly kind of moment. Like, that this is their cornerstone. We need something that they're greedy for, something they're prideful about, and something they have pain over. Hellfire is driven by honor and only honor. You can't bribe or bully that. That may have been true once, Nina, but it's been a very long year. Hellfire's much changed. You've seen him? Her green eyes were wide and eager. There, thought Kaz, the barrel hasn't beaten the hope out of you yet. I have. Nina took a deep, shuddering breath. He wants his revenge, Kaz. That's what he wants, not what he needs, said Kaz. Leverage is all about knowing the difference. So then we go on to Nina's chapter. It should be noted that in Kaz's perspective, when he meets Nina, he's really impressed at the way that she can go from being, like, coquettish and flirty to just really, like, herself, that she's an excellent actress and really good at manipulating, and that, you know, she works in a brothel, and that's, like, part of being good at your job, right? Is being able to flatter people and pretend to be interested and pretend to care. And she's so good at that it really impresses him, like, a couple times. But in Nina's chapter, we get to see, like, unfiltered Nina, and she is really frustrating at times. I actually liked her, to be honest, a lot. But she's very, like, quarrelsome about things and very, like, she gets stubborn without necessarily having the full story. Inej is somebody who, you know, while she may disagree, she'll sort of stand by quietly and watch to see. She'll think to herself that she disagrees. But unless she's totally certain of all the circumstances surrounding what she disagrees on, she won't say anything. She just makes sure that she has the facts right and watches everybody to see maybe there's something else going on here. And Nina is not like that. She wants to, like, get the information now. She wants people to tell her everything up front. She doesn't like this, like, mysterious act that fucking Kaz has going with things where he's, like, not explaining it all or being like, well, we'll wait until we're inside. Like, no, tell me now. Tell me what we're doing. I don't want to walk into this blind. And you know what? Honestly, I like fucking agree with her. I feel like there is a point to which being mysterious is just like a power play. And it's not giving you or any of your people any advantages in the situation that you're in. And Kaz, I think, can get a little bit dramatic with that kind of thing because he likes having the power over people. And that can be one of his pieces of leverage a lot of the time. And it's not really always the right call if you're dealing with somebody like Nina, who's going to constantly be like stopping and demanding information. Just tell her stuff ahead, and then you don't have to deal with these kinds of holdups as you're going through whatever, you know, operation you're doing. So they are rowing to the prison and they are dressed up, and she doesn't understand what they're doing or where they're going, why they're dressed up to go to a prison. We find out that there is a show at the prison. I guess it's like a once a week thing. But it's people who are wealthy come to watch the prisoners fight wild animals. And these animals are there's like drawings of them on this huge wheel that they spin, and they get paired up with whatever animal it lands on. And, you know, when I was talking earlier about this, feeling like this could easily have been over the top, like obviously having this sort of gladiatorial fight with wild animals is pretty over the top, but I really like the detail that they made sure to add, which is that the prisoners fight to be able to get to fight. Like, they are all eager to do this because if you are a fighter and if you're good, you get private quarters, you get better food, you just get treated better. So while it's really dangerous and while it can fuck you up or kill you, it makes your day-to-day life better. And this feels like something that's very true. Now, I'm going to get on a soapbox for 1 minute, and I'm giving myself exactly 1 minute from this moment here. The prison system is garbage. America is a trash fire. Everything about it is so terrible that it is beyond belief when you look into it. There is a hurricane coming for South Carolina right now, and we did not evacuate the prisons, and we didn't evacuate them for Katrina either, and like 150 people went missing just from one prison, and they don't know what happened to any of them. The water was up to their chests, and they were abandoned there for 4 full days with no food, electricity, plumbing, or anything, and they all thought they were going to drown, and some of them did, and some of them escaped, or some of them disappeared. And this is not that far outside of what our prison system is actually like. Allowing prisoners to do really fucked up, dangerous things for the entertainment of people in order to earn a little bit of money or, like, you know, commissary, whatever. 100% what we do. And we also send prisoners to fight wildfires and, you know, don't pay them. And then once they get out of prison, they can't even be hired by firefighting houses because they can't hire convicted felons. So they're being thrown out to, you know, a job that's going to kill them, likely, working, taking out wildfires for nothing because they're prisoners and they're disposable. And so we'll just send the dregs of society that we don't give a shit if they live or die to deal with these natural disasters. Okay, that was over a minute. Sorry. But guys, seriously, if you if you, like, I feel like that's like one of the number one things that our country needs to work on is dealing with our prison system and how fucked up it is, like so deeply. It's modern slavery, and it is the most, like, the more I find out about it, the more unbelievable it is to me that we have just let this shit go on. So back to this whole thing, while it feels over the top, it is over the top because we are overall a society that is fine with dehumanizing people. And if they're criminals, and I put that in quotes because in the situation with Katrina, where all those people died drowning, many of them had never even gone to trial yet. So they weren't even actually like, there were no charges necessarily pressed yet. They had not been convicted of anything. So I put, like, you know, criminal in quotes there because that's what they were accused of being. But many of them, that wasn't proven, and yet still wound up dead. So yeah, once we decide that, oh, that person's a criminal, they're no longer worthy of like basic care or rights or anything of that nature. And it's lovely for us to have a whole segment of the population that we don't think is worthy of anything, because then we can do whatever the fuck we want with them and not feel bad about it. And there's a lot of things in society that we want disposable people for, because there are a lot of jobs that are no fun to do, that nobody wants to do, that are super dangerous, that we don't want to have to pay people for. And so what better way to manage that than getting folks that we don't believe are really people? And so, yeah, this whole thing actually, like, there was a moment where I was kind of like, well, I don't know. And then I stopped and thought about it, and I was like, no, you know what? This is 100% legit. So, long story short, there was a one fight that they see to begin with, that is this older guy who obviously used to be really strong, but he's like getting older, and you know that look that men who had been strong but are older, like where you can see the muscles under their skin, but their skin is looser and everything just looks a little bit. So he spins the wheel and it lands on this image of a lizard. And it turns out that this lizard, like, the prisoner looks really bummed that this is what it landed on, because apparently there are some animals you just stand a better chance of surviving than others. But this lizard kills him like almost right away because it's got a poisonous bite. And he is super bummed because he pretty much knows he's going to die. And the people watching the show are bummed because he gets killed so quickly that it doesn't make a good show for them. So that fight gives us a taste of what this crowd is like and what the process is for the fight. Matthias then comes out, and Matthias gets, he spins the wheel and he gets a wolf. And this was really sad, actually. So he fights and kills this wolf because that's what he needs to do. But the wolves are sacred to him from where he comes from. And this is just, it kills me. Matthias knelt over the wolf. Its jaw was broken and it lay on the ground twitching in pain. He reached for a rock and slammed it hard into the poor animal's skull. It went still, and Matthias's shoulders slumped. The people howled, stomping their feet. Only Nina knew what this was costing him, that he'd been a druskel. Wolves were sacred to his kind, bred for battle like their enormous horses. They were friends and companions, fighting side by side with their druskel masters. The first wolf had recovered and was circling. "Move, Matthias," she thought desperately. He got to his feet, but his movements were slow, weary. His heart wasn't in this fight. His opponents were gray wolves, rangy and wild, but cousins to the white wolves of the Fjordan north. Matthias had no knife, only the bloody rock in his hand, and the remaining wolf prowled the arena between him and the pile of weapons. The wolf lowered its head and bared its teeth. So he fights it. Again, he wins, but it gets a good chunk out of him. Like, it costs him. Both fighters lay unmoving in the sand. Matthias kept his eyes closed, his face still buried in the creature's fur. Ugh, guys. This is so awful. Like, it's so sad. I hate it so much. And when he lifts his head, he's got tears all over his face. The rage was gone, and it was like some flame had gone out with it. His North Sea eyes were colder than she'd ever seen them, empty of feelings, stripped of anything human at all. This was what Hellgate had done to him, and it was her fault. So that's the first clue that you get. He's here because of something she did. This is the first, like, she's desperate to get him out, and we know that there's, like, but you figure it's just because of her maybe being in love with him or something. It's obvious now that she wants him out because she feels guilty because she put him there somehow. And it remains to be seen whether or not blaming herself is valid. Maybe that's not exactly right. But that's how she feels. And once we get to the end, it seems to be how he feels also. Because, spoiler alert, they sneak to his cell. And he's got, that very luxurious separate room from everyone else, which is like, the one thing about it is that it's clean and he's alone. And that's like what's luxurious. But they're bringing somebody with them that they're going to disguise in his clothes and give him like a really bad infection using her power. They're going to make it look like he has some kind of pox, so that even if it were Matthias, he would be unrecognizable. And that way they don't realize for a while that Matthias is gone. And this dude he has agreed to do this, the guy who's going to take Matthias's place. And this is not just like a glamour. Just to be clear, they don't just make it look like he's got pox. She gives him pox. Like, his skin splits and blisters and he feels it. This is super painful, but he agrees to do it. So apparently he's getting paid a lot for this, like I would hope. Going to appear to contract firepox, the lupine strain carried by wolves and dogs alike. He'll be quarantined for a month to see if he survives the fever and to outwait the contagion. Meanwhile, Matthias will be with us. Get it? So, no matter what I do to him, it won't last a month. I can't give him a permanent fever. My contact in the infirmary will make sure he stays sick enough. We just need to get him through diagnosis. Now get to work. This is going to hurt just as much as if you've been in the fight yourself, she warned. He scrunched up his face, bracing for the pain. I can take it. She rolled her eyes, then lifted her hands, concentrating. With a sharp slice of her right hand over her left, she snapped Muzzin's ribs. He let out a grunt and doubled over. That's a good boy, said Kaz, taking it like a champion. Knuckles next, then face. Yikes, guys. I mean, this is so awful. I've never seen firepox up close, Nina said. Count yourself lucky, Kaz said grimly. Hurry it up. She worked from memory, swelling and cracking the skin on Muzzin's face and chest, raising blisters until the swelling and pustules were so bad he was truly unrecognizable. The big man moaned. Why would you agree to do this? Nina murmured. The swollen flesh on Muzzin's face quivered, and Nina thought he might be trying to smile. Money was good, he said thickly. She sighed. Why else did anyone do anything in the barrel? So she's kind of like low-key like, are you sure it's good enough? Like, Kaz has to stop her and be like, bitch, would you not try and convince this dude to not do this while we're in the middle of it, please? That would be great. And finally, it's time to wake Matthias up because they need to get him. He's been drugged by the doctor who came in to see him right before they got there, which is part of why she has to give Helvar the injuries that Matthias has. Or no, sorry, not Helvar. Matthias is Helvar. I think that's his last name. Muzzin. She has to give Muzzin the injuries that Matthias has because the doctor already diagnosed him. And so if he came back and the guy suddenly didn't have broken ribs or anything anymore, they would know it wasn't him. So they have to wake Matthias up to at least get him walking enough so that it's not super difficult to get him out of here. And she wakes him up, and he rolls over and sees her face and says, Nina. And she's like, oh my God, yes, it's me. And we're here to get you out. And he rolls over her and grabs her by the throat and like growls her name and starts to strangle her. And that's the end of the chapter. Y'all don't know how hard it was to stop right there. I'm dying to know what the hell was going on. What did she do? Is it valid? Like, does he have a right to blame her? Or, I mean, did somebody tell him something about her that maybe isn't true? Like, I'm trying to give Nina the benefit of the doubt, to be honest, because it's easy to blame yourself for stuff. It's easy to reframe things and be like, it's my fault, when maybe it's not that simple. But the fact that he reacted this way when they got in there made me go, oh, maybe she's not just blaming herself. Maybe that's totally what happened. But I kind of like Nina, so I sort of want to believe that maybe it's not that simple in the end. We'll see. So yeah, it's right now it is Wednesday. The next episode that's going to be covering Six of Crows is on Tuesday the 18th. So if those of you who are listening to this have not missed it, there is a Crowdcast link that's up in the event on the Facebook page, facebook.com/unspoiledpod/events. And you can join us for the next one. So I'm excited because I know that I can read again right away. It's always nice when I do an episode and it ends on a cliffhanger like that and the next episode is already booked. It means that I can get right back to reading and find out what happens. So thank you very much again to Jesse, who commissioned this week's episode. And I'm trying to remember who initiated this book. I feel like this was, Jill, was it? I think. Yes. Okay. Jill Barrackling, initiated this book. So yeah, thank you guys for all commissioning this. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's such a strange, wild story with, really distinct characters that I've already grown to like a lot in a short time. And this chapter actually ended out part 2. So the next episode that we start is going to be beginning on part 3. And it's been 3 chapters roughly for every 50 pages. I haven't checked to see next episode if that's true again, but I think it's been pretty consistent so far. So we'll say for right now that it's about 3 chapters. So all right, guys. Well, thank you, Rachel, for coming to the Crowdcast. I think you're the only one here there, Rachel. So thank you for keeping me company. And I hope to see you at the next one, too, next week. All right, guys. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.